Hey everyone, my name is Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4.3 demo for the piece I call Rose. Thought I would keep the naming convention simple this time. So this is Rose from Street Fighter. This started from a drawing that I did a long time ago, which you can see right there. The original was done with Colorase pencil and ballpoint pen on a sketchbook, and now here we are years later, and I finally decided to color it. Now this video is going to have the same problem a bunch of the most recent videos have had, where it doesn't capture everything. In fact, it's really frustrating in this one. It gets done with the ambient occlusion pass and then it just blips to being done. So we're going to go through the file. That way we can make sure that we get into all the details as to what's going on here. I believe this is the last video that will require the deep dive, as the ones after this the video captures correctly. But I'll still do the deep dive in the future for any time that there's something special to look at, or just to mix things up every now and then. Rose is a character that I love her design, although I never really played her a great deal. I probably played her more in Street Fighter 4 than I did in Alpha, but just in general I think she's really kind of cool, and it gives me the opportunity to do a color scheme that isn't very frequent for me, like this purple with the yellow as an accent. I think is really cool. Then I can just sort of push this overall pink purpley image, which is really fun to do. So as far as the flattening is concerned, the flattening process is very similar to how it basically always is. I'm using the turpentine brush still. Right now I'm able to bang these out pretty quickly, so you're going to see this method continue for a while, and then I'll bring in some more line drawing stuff eventually. For now though, this is essentially just a slightly different take on what you've seen me do in the past with the whole lighting method of doing like an ambient occlusion pass and then doing like a direct light pass, and the fact that I'll just be choosing some different colors. I mean, that's really it. Different colors in the shadow, and from there we will try to get into the nitty-gritty of the like little tricky type effect stuff that you see going on in the final piece. Right now though, this is just flats. There's nothing fancy to refer to. There might be some, I've said it in like a million videos. I was going to say I keep the head separate from the neck, but I basically do that every time. So we'll get into the actual specifics of the layer stack when we get to the Procreate file rundown. So we just had a quick skin tone adjustment just to get her a little less pale and a little closer to how at least I perceive Rose. One thing that's funny is when you get the skin done and the eye, and then you're starting on this like leotard thing that she has on underneath her dress, and then you see her hair shape, it started making me think of Sidewalk, and then I was like, oh, it'd be cool to do a Sidewalk piece. And then because of course the era of like Street Fighter Alpha and like the Marvel fighting games and stuff, since that era overlaps, I actually got confused when I was in the middle of this, and I was like, wait, who am I doing? And so I realized that how close that was. I mean, I know that like in the grand scheme of character designs, they're wildly different, but if you took the dress off and she just had the leotard on, she would already be super close to Psylocke's look, which I think is kind of funny. One thing that I'm going to talk about that has nothing to do with the flattening process, if you are wondering how I took a photo of some line art and then started coloring it, I know that comes up every now and then. It's really simple because I'm not trying to keep the line art around for the final art, so you can be really just kind of messy with it. What I did for this was because the yellow of the paper is already there, because I think it had like an Instagram filter on it, or at least if it didn't, it was probably taken like around yellow light. It's really yellow and the colors are just kind of all over the place. In order to make sure that's not a problem, I just desaturate that layer first, then I go into the curves and I make the line art pop a little bit more, so that I can actually get the contrast much higher, because all I'm looking for is the lines as guidance. I'm not looking to get any nuance out of those lines. And then I set it to multiply, For those who don't know, multiply essentially makes it so that anything closer to white is transparent, anything closer to black is opaque, and then anything that has color to it, that color ends up coming through. So for instance, when you want to make something completely black and white and then you set it to multiply, anything that's white will be see-through, and then as it gets closer to black, it'll get more and more opaque. And so that's a quick way to set lines to be essentially like clear, like it gets rid of the background. If this were in Photoshop, I would do a more elaborate trick to eliminate the white from the lines, and then I'd have the lines isolated, but that trick doesn't exist in Procreate. So instead we just do something like this. I'll go over that too when we do the layer breakdown so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about there. So now I'm going to let the rest of the flattening process just roll, and then when I get into some of the shadow layer stuff, I'll start talking more. Flats are wrapping up, and there's some nuance to like skin tones and like other little subtle color shifts that aren't there yet. That's because once I get the shadows in, I'm gonna have the structure of all of the different forms done, and then that's when I can make some decisions around like putting blush around the like nose or ears or cheeks, or putting eyeshadow on, or whatever it is. So right now we're doing the shadow pass. I go with a more purple shadow than I normally do. In fact, right there on her face where it overlaps with her face, since her face is close to white, you can see the closest representation of the color of the shadow I'm using. And that's because I want this whole thing to have this purple pink vibe to it, so we're gonna sit in that realm for the shadows. I start with doing a sort of ambient occlusion pass. That's what you see going on right here. This is usually not, although I can sometimes get absent-minded and kind of screw it up. This is not taking into account any directional lighting. This is just trying to add some form to basically to every shape. There are times though, because I like to play with a more graphic style, where I will use this to do different things. Like for instance, we've got her like big hair shape that comes down past her face is like a big graphic shape, and then I just sort of color that like it's a gradient, and that's just because I'm trying to play into the graphic nature of that. It's not necessarily a super accurate ambient occlusion type thing. As I completely lose my voice, let me fix that. So we're going to continue doing this through all of the layers using the select paint, select clear method, where we're moving up through the layer stack and doing selections and clears on a shadow layer that's all the way at the top. And instead of explaining that deeper like I've done in the past, or like what's linked down below, if you want to see that, I will talk about it more when we get to the actual layer breakdown. I'm actually quite behind on these videos as per the how many pieces I've actually done recently, so there's some techniques that have already changed with what I do now versus what's in this video, although they're very minor. It's mostly around how much I'm using the smudge tool when I'm doing this ambient occlusion pass. I want to still mostly try to embrace the turpentine brush feel, but I use a turpentine brush smudge to try and get a lot more softness when I need softness. So what you're seeing a lot happen here is we're putting down the paint with the turpentine brush, sometimes using that same brush to smudge, because if you leave the brush down you can go into sort of a smudge state, but then if I want to get additional smudge, I just use the smudge tool. And you're going to get a big example of that coming up when I do her scarf. The part of her scarf that's on the left side of the canvas that you can't see right now because we're zoomed in, I do like a lot of that, and I'll point it out when we get there. Right now, we're focusing on the topology of her face and trying to make sure that we're bringing out what we want to in the form using this ambient occlusion pass. up the dress and we're going to move into the scarf. You can see here I'm putting in these just heavy, just bleh, with paint, and then I go through and smudge the shit out of it right there, and then I smudge it again. I'm actually going to do a demo of that so that you can see that a little bit more in real time in this video. So when we're done looking at this time lapse, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to go through the layer stack, we're going to talk about how I prepare the lines, and I'm going to show you exactly what that sort of smudge pattern looks like that I'm doing there. Right now I'm just making sure that that's on point, getting the sort of lighting of that done, and now we move into the other side. You'll see in the layer stack, but this scarf layer is actually the topmost layer, and that's just because of like the weird way that all of the stacks worked out. And so now that I've got some of this structure in place, we can go in and we can put things like the blush on her nose and eyeshadow and things like that, because we know where all of these actual structural landmarks are. And really, I think that's probably the only place where we're going to be doing that in this is on her face. There's not much reason to have variants other places. You of course could. It's just I don't necessarily need to represent that with the look I'm going for in this particular one. Now these are all done, the blush is just done with like a pink that's lowered in opacity. The lips are done with a color that's set to multiply and then lowered in opacity, and that's the same thing with the eyeshadow. And then just very different colors for each one of those so that I can get it all to look exactly how I want to. So I guess I kind of lied. We get a little bit of the direct light shadow in this, so we'll just watch it for as long as it lasts and then we'll jump into the file. You can see we've got the light coming from the right side of the canvas, and so she as a figure is backlit. So we're making sure that that scarf casts within itself, and then like her head and the sort of upward angle of her hairbang cast onto the downward part of her hairbang, and we're just moving through layer by layer and making sure that we're selecting it, clearing it, and then selecting again and painting. And again, I'll show exactly what I mean by that when we get to the layer breakdown. Here just trying to keep as much awareness as I can of the lighting at all times, making sure that I don't screw that up. There are of course always going to be some screw ups in the lighting, but that's the hardest part I think of a lighting pass, is just keeping it in your mind so that so that the light is always coming from the right way and hitting the figure in the right way, but you're able to get the more artistic aspects in there that you want. Like you want to have the face lit a certain way, or you want to represent some part of the illustration in a certain way, and at the same time keeping the lighting consistent. Okay, and now it's gonna blip to final. Right in the most exciting part. Boom. So there we go. So that's the final piece. But let's leave the final piece really quickly and talk about the file itself. Okay, now here is the final illustration with we're in the Procreate file. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly, not because I want to rush through it, but because we've gone over a lot of these files now, and I think you're going to get the gist pretty quickly. I'll try not to sort of underserve any aspect of this. Let's start looking at our layer stack. We've got this folder on top full of like little detailed tweaks, which we'll go through in a second. We've got this, which is sort of like an adjustment layer of sorts. We've got this, which is some effects and the foreground bubble. Let me scoot this a little bit more over just so we can see everything. So we'll turn that off. We've got this, which is a bunch of eye stuff. We've got this, which is the majority of our lighting, our flats. I'll leave the flats on for now so that we can have some sort of context in the image. And then we have this outline and then the background. Okay, I think that the best place to start might actually be the background. So let's go there. So you can see that we have this blue. I did not arrive at that blue by saying like the background will be blue. Instead, what happened was as I was working on the background, I created this layer right here, which you can see goes from like a purple, and then there's a pink in the bottom right, and really darker up in the top left, and then it's just completely opaque in the middle, or excuse me, transparent in the middle. And that's because originally these were multiple layers where I was just sort of messing with things. And then this background layer, you know, you can tweak this wherever you want it to, and it'll start changing the feel of that background quite a bit. I'll undo that just so that we can have it be as accurate as possible to what the final is. So with that layer on, we already set the stage. Let me turn the flats back on. We set the stage for the vibe of everything, but it's still not nearly as sort of like pink as things eventually get. Let's turn on this layer, which is just the same layer but with the adjusted opacity. And then we've got our little blurred out bubbles in the background. Here is a multiply layer. That's a purple noise is actually what it is. Let's make that normal so you can see right there. That's just using the noise filter, making it color. Actually, sorry, that's not using the noise filter. That's using the noise brush, which I don't use often, but that's what that is. And then here's the actual bubbles themselves. I wanted to turn those on at the end just because they are quite a thing. You can get distracted by them easily. These bubbles were just done by being drawn with the turpentine brush, being smudged in the middle, and then getting that erasing so that it gets that completely transparent part to try and sell that bubble aspect to it. And then it has a pure white highlight on there. And then at some point during the process, these all had to get merged together, which is why you see them as one layer like that. Then we've got this outline, which is just a hot pink set to overlay with its opacity greatly reduced. It's the same pink more or less as the bubbles. So let's go ahead and dim that back again. Okay, now we get into the meat and potatoes of this whole thing, which is the shadow layers and all these other adjustments in here. I'm going to go through them really quickly. If anything seems like I didn't explain it, it might be because I have explained it in the past and I don't want to go through it too deeply right now. However, if something is a particularly complicated notion, I'll make sure to explain it as much as I can. So first we have our ambient occlusion shadows right there. So when we turn those on and off, you can see what happens. Then we have this, this is just an additional layer because I wanted to bring some extra detail to what was going on in her face. Then we have our direct light shadow, which is right here, which this is the one that's representing the fact that the light is coming from the right. This right here is an additional shadow. I wanted to make sure that we weren't losing some of the shadow details, but I wanted to still have the shadow cast from her scarf onto her and then from her onto the part of the scarf that's to the left, and that just is how I ended up representing it. So you can see here we've got 4 layers that are doing all that shadow work right there. Here we've got the transition from the light to the dark. Here we have purple bounce light on her left side, coming from the left I should say, so anything that it hits. Here I just doubled it up on her face so that we could make sure that a lot of that light was coming to her face. We were getting the attention there. Here's her hair shine, and then the more intense center of that hair shine. Here is some bounce, mostly coming, I think that's actually, it might only be coming from, coming from her scarf onto her hair and to the back of her leotard there, which is just sampling the color from the scarf, painting it in and adjusting the opacity. And then here is something hair based. Yeah, okay, it's this right here. It's just another shine that I had forgotten at some point while I was working on it, and I decided to throw it in on its own layer. Okay, So that's that. Now let's go into this like eye details layer. Is that literally all this is? Yep, that's all this is. So it's like we've got this reflection and then this highlight with this bit of this like hot pink behind it. And then this is, oh, this is actually her lip shine. You can see it down there on her lip. So that was like an afterthought of just like, oh crap, I gotta throw these things in there too. Oh yeah, here we go. Now we're onto the foreground bubble. And this gradient you see at the bottom to sort of increase that lighting, that sort of atmospheric lighting that's coming up from the bottom. You can actually see the anatomy of these bubbles a little more clearly now because we have the full thing. So it's this for the sort of general shape. Then we've got this gradient to round it out, round out like its form and its reflection. The outline is duplicated and blurred so we can get a little bit of glowiness coming off of it. And then we've got our hot highlight on it. Now we get into this color balance adjustment layer. So if I put this to full opacity, you can see it's very yellow on the highlights and very purple on the shadows. And then it's actually got like a little bit more redness brought in. And then I have the opacity of that lowered down to 28%. So that it's flavoring it a little. It's going to be a little hard to see probably in the video, but there I am toggling it. You can see the little bit of extra flavor it gives there. And then last but not least, we have just some other rando adjustments. We've got my signature layer, which is just the signature layer. And then we've got this that I'm actually struggling to see. Where is that? Let's move the layer. Oh, it's the eye. I wondered if it was the eye. Yep, just some eye reflection. This is some skin that the shadow transition on the skin that I forgot to get, and since we had that adjustment layer in there, I wanted to make sure that I just painted it on instead of redoing all of that. Here we have, is this for the button? Nope, it's the scarf reflection on this bubble. And then we have one last bit here, which is the reflection on her button, but it's also this like interesting little adjustment here that I just felt like it needed. But this is the main thing right there. And that's it. I also said I wanted to talk about the smudge pattern that I've been using, and by pattern I mean the sort of gestural pattern. Let's show that by taking this egg-like thing and creating a new layer, setting it to multiply. I've already selected this color, feels good, and we'll take the turpentine brush. We'll see what it looks like. Okay, that's the shadow that we're going to get right there. And the way that I have been doing my shading when I'm trying to go for something super soft is, let's select this egg shape for a second, is I'll usually come in pretty hard with something like this. And then I want to do a smudging pattern that's like across the brush directions and then back with them again, and then across them and then back with them. And what I mean by that is, let's get a pretty good sized smudge here. I want to go like this, where I'm going in and out. Now the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm trying to take the part over here that's not painted and the part over here that is painted, and I'm trying to get those to blend with each other. And so the fastest way to do it is by just flat out being rough with it like that and saying, okay, pull those together, and then going back with the shape of the form again. So you can see that essentially the two motions that I'm doing is I'm forcing the two colors to mix, and then I'm easing them into harmony again. So like if I want to keep going like this, I guess I just keep smoothing it back and forth in this direction. And then if I say, you know, it actually kind of ends a little abruptly, let's start pulling some of that back in. And then I go back again to trying to hit the actual form. So the in and out, the into the paint and out of the paint is to like force the mixing, and then the with the shape is in order to try and get the smoothing back in. and you get something like this. Obviously it's a little ham-fisted because I'm doing this one-handed while I record, but I think you get the gist of it. Just to repeat it one more time, just to make sure that this is somehow understood in multiple versions. Let's fill that layer like that, and then I'll just do the same color, but I'll set it to multiply. Select. So what I'll do here is I'll paint it like this. So I'm saying like, okay, that's a little hard. It's like a really messy cell shade. And then I'll go like this to pull the paint and the non-painted together. And then I'll start working it in the actual motion of that form. The sort of the rhythm of its form, I guess you could say. So you can see I'm sort of naturally pulling in and out when I want to get that paint mixed a different way, and then I'm going with the form when I want to start making it work together a little bit more nicely. Alright, let's talk about how we can prepare lines to be colored. Now what I'm specifically talking about here is not lines that will remain in the final illustration. Of course you can do that, but I'm talking about more just like a quick and dirty way if you want to use a drawing that you have or you have a photograph of and you want to do some colors for it. What we have here is just a normal canvas, but I've already imported in a photo that I found the other day from when I did my Pink Hair Girls Kickstarter campaign, and I had taken some photos of a couple of the backer reward sketch cards. So if this is yours out there, wave, because it's been years and I don't remember who got what, but I thought this was a great example because you can see that the sketch card is distorted in the photo, and it's also like this light blue and there's like a shadow cast on it, and so it's a great example of how to start preparing something to be drawn, or excuse me, to be colored. It's already drawn. Okay, so let's just do this real quick. I think it'll be pretty easy to understand. You can see in the layer stack we just have the one image. I'm going to duplicate it because sometimes I might just want to keep it around for later, but let's just duplicate it for now. Let's go to adjustments and hue, saturation, brightness, and we will just take the saturation one here. See, very saturated, not saturated. And now you can see already we've done one major step for getting this ready. Next we go to curves, and you can see here there's a kind of complex graph that you can do a bunch of crazy stuff with. We're not going to bother doing anything crazy because we don't need any nuance for what we need this image for. We're going to take this bottom point and slide it a little in, which is going to make the darks darker. And then we're going to take this top right point, we're going to slide it in, which is going to make the lights lighter. And we're going to get it to where we think, yeah, that feels like there's already a lot more line clarity. You can see there when I flip it back and forth. Now, yeah, that shadow did get a little heavier, but we don't really care about that right now. So let's just say done. And just to get extra fancy here so that we can make sure that this is totally ready for coloring, let's go here and clear. And then we'll go over here. And we'll just cut this out. Clear, and I'll just really quickly slice this off too right here. Okay, so now we've got it cut. Since we've got it cut a little bit too, we can see that the angle needs to be adjusted, so that'll be kind of nice and easy. So we just go to transform. Let's start by lining up our bottom edge like that, and then let's pull this a little like that and pull this a little, oops, gotta press and hold on it, and I'm doing this one-handed, so it's not, there we go, it's not the greatest. Okay, we get that a little more upright, and then we want to stretch her. At this point I'm just adjusting her so that she looks like I probably meant her to look, since the photo is all, you know, wacky. And then we just size it up so that we can get her to fill whatever part of the screen we want. And so there she is. Now we talked about multiply. Just to show multiply a little bit more clearly, I'm going to make the canvas red. So if we tap the little N here and we get our layer adjustments, we can go to darken, because multiply is technically in the darken category, and select multiply. Now you can see what happened here is anything that is black is opaque, we can still see it, and anything that's white is transparent. The opposite of that would be if we went to lighten and said screen. That's what that is there. The black is becoming transparent. Now we want, well, for these purposes we want multiply. There's a bunch of other layer effects that I think you should go and play with, but that's it for now. So let's take the fuzzy brush, just if we wanted to clean this up a little bit more for painting purposes. Get rid of some of this extra noise, and maybe I will paint this. I kind of like the way she looks. So let's say, okay, that's it. Let's say we want to finish it off a little bit so that when we're doing our painting, let's get it a little bigger. We can, her hair might come around, something like that. I think it should probably be more full, something like that. And this hair, oh, I see what I did. Shaved side of the head, and then the hair goes up like that. There we go. Cool. Let's call it good. So now we go down here and we put an extra layer. Let's just say she's got skin, something like that, and I'll just use a big fat brush, and you can see here that we can start using these lines as a basis for actually coloring this character. So those are some of the techniques and the building blocks of how this illustration was completed. I love Street Fighter. You're going to see a lot more Street Fighter characters because I've been coloring a lot of them. So I hope you like Street Fighter like I do. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video or any of the other ones, please consider liking and subscribing. And I will see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.